Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, I want to try something a little different. Usually, when we talk about history, you get this image of a dusty library, old books, dates, names of kings. But today, I want to treat our source material more like a classified file that just landed on a desk in the Pentagon.
So we're basically stepping into the war room here.
Exactly. Because the stack of research we're covering today, it's all on economic history, military logistics, and the Ming Dynasty. It reads less like a tragedy and more like a definitive case study in grand strategic failure.
It really does. And what's so fascinating and frankly terrifying about this case is that the failure didn't happen because of a lack of courage. It wasn't because the soldiers ran away or because they lacked technology.
Right, looking at the specs, they had the guns, they had the ships, they had the manpower.
It was a failure of logistics, a failure of what we now call geoeconomics. We're looking at how a superpower, maybe the biggest superpower of its time, accidentally rigged its own economy to explode.
So let's set the board. We're talking about the Ming Dynasty in China. This is the 15th and 16th centuries. And I think for a modern listener, it's hard to grasp the sheer scale of this player. This isn't a developing nation.
Oh, not at all. No. We're talking about the heavyweight champion of the world, a population of over 150 million people.
Which is?
To put that in perspective, that's more than the population of Renaissance Europe and the Ottoman Empire combined.
And the economy.
Unmatched.
Yeah.
They were the world's manufacturing base. If you were a rich merchant in London or Cairo or, Mexico City, you wanted Chinese goods. Silk, porcelain, tea. They had absolute dominance in production.
So you have the biggest population, the best manufacturing, and a massive trade surplus. On paper, this looks like an invincible empire.
It looks like a hegemon, and yet this hegemon suffered a rapid, total, systematic collapse.
And that's the central question we're tackling. How does a superpower with that much leverage destroy itself? Because when I was reading through the outline, the thesis here seems almost boring at first glance. It wasn't some giant invasion that kicked it off. It was silver.
It sounds mundane, doesn't it? Just a metal. But the thesis is that the Ming collapse was a lethal dependency on a single supply chain vulnerability, foreign silver, combined with a political ideology that made managing that vulnerability just impossible.
Okay, so let's pop the hood on this empire. Before we get to the collapse, we need to understand the engine.
Yeah.
You mentioned they were the manufacturing leader, but was this a state-run command economy?
Yeah.
Like the Soviet Union?
No, and that's a common misconception. The previous dynasty, the Song, was very heavy on state control, but the Ming, they shifted gears. They actually adopted a surprisingly laissez-faire approach to industry. Yes. They privatized key industries. Salt, tea, ceramics, these were largely in the hands of private merchant families. And the agricultural base was just massive. They had improved hydraulics, better tools. They were running a huge surplus.
I saw a statistic in the reading that honestly shocked me. The tax rate.
Hey, yeah, I had a feeling you'd notice that one.
It said agricultural taxes were lowered to something like 1.5% of production.
Roughly 1.5% to 2% in many areas, yes.
I mean, hearing that today, 1.5%, that's basically free. It's negligible.
It was an explicit policy to encourage production. They wanted to stimulate growth. So you have low taxes, a booming private sector, and massive output.
So if I'm an analyst looking at this company, the fundamentals look incredible. Low overhead, high output. Where is the flaw? Why does this machine break?
The flaw isn't in the engine, it's in the fuel. Despite all this physical wealth, all the rice, the silk, the ceramics, the Ming Empire didn't have a stable domestic currency.
This is the part I struggled to wrap my head around. How can you have the world's biggest economy and no money?
Well, they had money, but it was broken. They didn't have gold reserves. They didn't have nearly enough copper mines to mint coins for 150 million people. And early in the dynasty, they tried paper money.
And let me guess, they printed too much of it.
Way, way too much. Without a central bank to regulate it, the emperors just treated the printing press like an infinite credit card. Hyperinflation hit, trust collapsed, and the paper became worthless. It got so bad the note was worth less than the ink used to print it.
Okay, so paper's out, copper's too heavy and scarce. The market needs something else.
Exactly. The market, not the government, but the market decided on silver. It's durable, hard to fake, and it has high value density. The economy informally dollarized itself, but with silver.
But here's the catch, right? China doesn't have silver mines.
Bingo. They have almost zero domestic silver production. So you have an economy of 150 million people that creates this massive demand for a currency they cannot produce themselves.
That is a terrifying strategic position. You are operationally dependent on foreign imports just to transact business in your own towns.
It's an outsourcing of monetary sovereignty. And who are the suppliers? Initially, Japan.
Their historic rival.
Exactly. And later, more critically, it was the Spanish Empire, shipping silver from the Americas across the Pacific.
So to keep the lights on in Beijing, you need a ship to arrive safely from Mexico, which is run by the Spanish. That is a long, fragile supply chain.
It's the definition of a critical vulnerability, and the Ming court. Well, you'd think, knowing this, the government would do everything to protect that supply line.
But the government isn't a monolith, is it? The sources describe this constant infighting.
It was paralyzed. Imagine a boardroom where half the executives hate the other half. On one side, you have the Confucian bureaucracy, the scholars, the administrators. They believe in stability, agriculture, tradition. They tend to view trade as, well, as dirty, something beneath the dignity of the state.
And on the other side?
The eunuch faction. These were the emperor's personal servants, who grew into a massive power block. They were often more interested in, wealth extraction and military adventures. These two groups spent more time fighting each other than managing the state.
Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the real world is operating. The merchant families, the smugglers, the foreign powers.
Right, and the data shows just how dependent they became. From 1567 to 1644, something like 330 million taels of silver flowed into China. By the early 1600s, the Spanish in Manila were funneling 90 tons of silver a year into the Ming economy.
90 tons annually. That is a river of metal.
It is. And then comes the policy decision that really locks the handcuffs on, the single whip reform.
Can you break that down? The name sounds intense, but the mechanics seem pretty bureaucratic.
Oh, it was intense in its implication. In 1581, the government effectively admitted defeat on the currency issue. They said, okay, fine, we will tax everyone in silver.
Wait, so before this, you could pay your taxes in grain or labor?
Yes. You could grow rice and give a portion to the magistrate. But the single whip reform consolidated everything. From now on, you owe the state silver.
So suddenly, silver isn't just a luxury for merchants. If I'm a peasant farming rice in the middle of nowhere, I need silver to pay my taxes or I lose my farm.
You got it. It transformed silver from a trade medium into the prerequisite for a revival. It also meant that the state's ability to pay its soldiers and bureaucrats was now 100% tied to the inflow of foreign silver.
So if the silver stops, the government stops.
The trap is set. They have linked their domestic fiscal solvency to a global supply chain they do not control.
I want to shift gears to the manufacturing side for a second phase 2 in our outline, because the sources describe a place called Qing Dynasty. And honestly, it sounds less like a 16th century village and more like a modern industrial park.
It really does. We need to shed this image of the solitary craftsman making a pot in his hut. Qing Dynasty was a military-industrial complex for ceramics.
The scale is just mind-blowing.
We're talking about an entire administrative zone dedicated to production, over 300 active kilns. And the labor force, this is fascinating. The Ming had moved away from forced conscription labor. These were wage laborers.
So people punching a clock?
Essentially, yeah. It was a kind of proto-proletariat. Specialized workers, paid in silver, mass-producing standardized goods for a global market. They had quality control, they had supply chains, division of labor. It was a factory system.
It sounds like Detroit in the 1920s, but 400 years early.
And this capability is what drove the trade. The Europeans were obsessed with it. There's this quote from a Portuguese merchant of the time. "The Chinese need nothing from us but silver, and we need everything from them."
That quote just sums up the whole imbalance perfectly. Europe had nothing China wanted. European wool, too itchy. European manufacturing, crude compared to Ming standards. The only thing they had that the Ming accepted was silver.
It was a massive trade surplus.
Which sounds like a position of incredible strength. We have the goods, you have the cash, come buy from us.
But this brings us to the strategy part of the failure. Because instead of laying into this, instead of building a massive navy to protect the trade routes, the Ming did something that seems completely counterintuitive.
The Heijin, the sea ban.
They banned the ocean.
Effectively, yes. They banned private maritime trade.
Why? Why would you choke off the one thing fueling your entire economy?
Fear. Security. They were worried about the woku Japanese pirates and general instability on the coast. The logic was, if the ocean is dangerous, we'll just lock the door. They thought if they cut off access, the piracy would just starve and go away.
But that never works. Prohibition never works.
It had the exact opposite effect. The demand for silver was too high. The demand for porcelain was too high. So the honest merchants became smugglers. The trade didn't stop. It just went underground.
Which means the state stops getting tax revenue from customs. Worse, they lost the revenue, but they kept the dependency. And they lost domain awareness. Because it was all black market, the emperor had no idea how much silver was actually coming in or who was bringing it. They were flying completely blind.
And on top of the ban, you have this bizarre tribute system. The sources say the Ming treated trade as, what, a favor?
It's the Middle Kingdom mentality. In their view, China was the center of civilization. Other nations weren't trading partners. They were subordinates paying respect.
So if I'm a Japanese trader, I can't just show up and sell my goods.
No. You have to come as a diplomat, you bring tribute, and here's the picker. To show how benevolent and wealthy the emperor is, the Ming court would pay above market value for your tribute and give you lavish gifts in return.
So it's a loss leader.
A massive loss leader. Every trade mission actually cost the state money. They were bleeding the treasury to maintain an image of superiority while actively criminalizing the private trade that actually generated profit.
That is just stubborn.
It's ideological blindness. And they kept doubling down. In 1523, after some Japanese tribute missions got into a fight, the Ming just closed the ports entirely, kicked everyone out.
They did reopen them, though, right?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah, in 1567. But it was heavily restricted. Quotas, rules. In 1613, they even banned foreigners from crossing the Yangtze River. They were constantly trying to throttle the very flow of blood that kept the economy alive.
So you have a booming engine, a fuel line made of foreign silver, and a government that keeps stepping on the hose.
And then comes the 1630s, the strategic shock.
The perfect storm. What actually happened out in the world?
Everything goes wrong at once. First, Japan, the original supplier, closes off to the west and restricts exports. They go full isolationist. Second, the Spanish Empire hits its own financial crisis and limits the silver coming out of the Americas. And third, European wars disrupt the shipping lanes.
So the tap just runs dry.
The silver stops arriving.
Walk us through the cascade inside China, because I think we hear deflation and we think, oh, prices go down, that's good. Why is this fatal?
Deflation is deadly for a debtor. And remember, because of the tax reform, every single peasant is a debtor to the state. Let's make this concrete. Say you're a farmer. Your tax bill is fixed at 1 ounce of silver.
Okay.
Last year, silver was plentiful. You sold 100 bags of rice to get that 1 ounce. But now, the ships have stopped coming. Silver is scarce. Its value has skyrocketed. To get that same 1 ounce of silver, you now have to sell 300 bags of rice.
So my tax rate effectively tripled overnight.
Exactly. Even though the official rate didn't change, the real cost exploded. The peasants couldn't pay, they went bankrupt, they lost their land.
And if the peasants can't pay, the state gets no revenue.
And here's the military degradation. The Ming state is broke, they stopped paying the troops.
That seems like rule number 1 of how to stay in power.
Yeah.
Pay the guys with the swords.
It is definitely rule number 1, and they failed it. Soldiers who aren't paid don't fight, they desert. Or worse, they realize, hey, I have a sword, that guy has food, I'm going to take it. They turn into bandits.
So the army dissolves into the very chaos it's supposed to prevent.
And out of this chaos rises a leader, a man named Li Zicheng. He rallies the starving peasants and the unpaid soldiers. They aren't fighting for some new political theory, they are fighting for survival.
And this leads to the endgame in 1644.
It's swift. Li Zicheng marches on Beijing. The city defenses unpaid, demoralized, and effectively open the gates for him.
And the emperor.
The Chongzhen Emperor, the last of the Ming. He retreats to Jingshan Park, a hill just behind the Forbidden City. He looks out over his burning capital, and he hangs himself from a tree.
It's such a striking, tragic image. The ruler of the world's greatest economic power, dead because of a supply chain break.
The scholars Flynn and Giraldus summarize it in a way that I just love. 7 words: no silver, no taxes, no taxes, no dynasty.
It really challenges the traditional narrative, doesn't it? We usually hear about the Ming falling because of corruption or moral decay or, I don't know, bad horoscopes.
Right. And those things existed. Corruption is always a factor. But this analysis suggests it was a mechanical failure. It was the inevitable result of coupling a globalized economy with an isolationist national security policy.
You can't have one without the other.
The Ming thought they were self-sufficient because they made everything. But they lacked the one thing that made the transaction possible. They tried to reap the economic benefits of the world while politically hiding from it.
That brings us to the final takeaway. And I think this is where the history lesson becomes a warning.
We live in a hyper-interconnected world today. We hear a lot of talk about decoupling, about economic independence.
Make it here, buy it here.
Exactly. And the question the Ming Dynasty poses to us is this. In a global system, is true economic independence actually possible? Or is the attempt to isolate yourself, to shut the doors while you still rely on the global grid, actually the quickest path to destruction?
It makes you think. Maybe the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy at the gates, but the supply chain we take for granted. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.